Showtime.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to Miracles with a Twist. I'm Lori Cardona. I present A Course in Miracles from an interfaith perspective. And today I have a very special guest. I'm very excited. A good friend of mine, Steve Pollack. Steve and I go way back. We were talking the other day and we figured it might be maybe over 20 years or just around 20 years ago. We met at a networking event in Miami, back when I was living in Miami. And we found out very quickly that we had a lot in common. We became fast friends. And we started something called the Spiritual Cinema Circle. Back in those days, you had to order a DVD and wait for it to show up and then gather your friends. And we had wonderful discussions back in the day. And fast forward to now, we're still having wonderful discussions. So Steve, hi, it's great to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, yes. So Steve, I want everybody to know why you're such a special guest, other than being a special friend, which is Steve is a facilitator of meditation and a very long-term dedicated meditator and practitioner of spiritual practices. And also he is a facilitator and coach of nonviolent communication. And so the other day I was saying, it's such an interesting combination because, as you know, I've been doing these podcasts on holy relationships and emotional healing and discussing the importance of our words, how our words matter and how we interact with other people, and taking responsibility for how we show up spiritually as well as emotionally. And you've blended those two things as a way of life and as a way of coaching other people. So you told me a great story, how it all came together. So I'd love to hear that story again, if you could share it with us.
It grew out of the meditation gatherings because the first few times I experienced group meditations, I thought I was getting a taste of heaven.
Yeah.
All these people sitting together quietly, peacefully, just that quality of open-heartedness and just being connected at that level. And it just became so blissful even. And I felt the connection between my heart and other people's hearts. And we were, it felt even closer than family in a sense. Sometimes catching glimpses of the inner light in deep meditation and
Yeah.
inner planes. And it's just wonderful. It's like going into another world, tender and loving and sweet. And then when you leave the group and you get in your car and go home or wherever you're going next, and now you're dealing with people who are not on that level of consciousness, right? And their hearts may be somewhat closed down. They may be all in their heads. They may be going through all kinds of stressful things. And it felt like going from heaven to hell.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
And then it
I
just,
understand that from an experience I had years ago. I went to a retreat where everybody had the opportunity to just sort of stop. They would hear these bells and they would stop, and we'd all feel so peaceful, and we'd come back to ourselves. And then when the retreat was over, it's like, oh, there's the real world. And the real world has triggers and it activates emotions. And suddenly you have like spiritual amnesia, in a Course in Miracles, which you and I are combining to talk about today. It reminds us that when we do have those triggers, that instead of shaming and blaming another person, we should go within to understand what is it within myself that has not yet been healed. What do I need to heal so that I can take responsibility for how I show up?
exactly. And that very question perplexed me because I hadn't arrived at that clarity yet that you just expressed. And I was perplexed and torn because if I can be connected with a group of people without words and feel so much love and peace and joy, and then not be able to bridge that over into everyday life and dealing with people at work and neighbors and friends and all of that, um, that I was really torn and perplexed for years. And then one day at a spiritual gathering, annual convention in Chicago, there were all kinds of courses that were being offered through the weekend, and one of them was nonviolent communication. I was so curious, I immediately signed up for it, and that was it for me. Once I started to learn the basic process of communicating nonviolently, I was able to still come from the heart, speak my truth, but in a more gentle, compassionate way, and take responsibility for my own feelings and give other people a chance to share theirs.
So learning how to speak with compassion and understanding and combining some heart to heart connection with an understanding for the human condition, as well as your meditative practices.
The meditation really helps. And also, the nonviolent communication, when you first start studying it, it just seems to be all about you, or it seemed to me to be all about me and healing my wounds and being able to speak from the heart without coming from a wounded place. But as I got deeper into it, I realized this is just as much, if not more, about what other people have to say, and they may still be coming from that wounded place. So can I have compassion for them?
Mm, yeah. Well, how did you combine whatever childhood religion you grew up in with your meditative practice? Was there any influence from your younger years?
I grew up in a Jewish family that was not very religious. It was more cultural Judaism. So my own parents and my siblings really had not studied Judaism deeply, but I found as I later in life, I went off on my own and I explored more deeply into Jewish philosophy and philosophical thought, and in particular Kabbalah.
Mm,
And I
Mystic
found,
studies.
yes, I loved Kabbalah. And as I delved deeper into that, I found that they suggest that when someone says, let's say someone says something really hurtful to you, or they come at you with a strong criticism or an attack, and it's very painful, they suggest the highest response you could possibly have to that is just to say thank you to that person and then walk away and do some
Mm,
self-introspection, see if there's any truth in what they had just, even though they blasted you in a violent way,
mhm.
can you parse some truth out of it? And that is so much like NVC.
Yeah, and I love the mystic studies. I mean, you and I were talking about that because you were doing some meditation groups that you do on Sundays, talking about mysticism, and at the same time, I was doing the mystic conversations, which went on for 6 months with my podcast partner, Reverend Lisa Benton. And one of the things we found out was that consistency of the message in all the mystic studies and in the Course in Miracles as well, about taking responsibility for self, which is why the emotional healing is so important too. Because if we don't heal emotionally, it's hard for us to take that really deep, rigorously honest look at ourselves.
So it brings us back to self-inquiry, and that
Yes.
reminds me of something that I heard a lot in nonviolent communication work is people, and in pop psychology too, people talk about triggers and they say, oh, you just triggered me, or that situation just triggered me, or the traffic just triggered me. And I took that a step further, at least for myself. I don't say anyone or anything triggers me. I say, oh, I just triggered myself when I saw that. The way I reacted, I didn't respond really thoughtfully. I reacted instantly. And I heard one speaker speak about triggers. She said, why are people all using this term trigger? Do you really want to be a gun?
Ah, right. Yeah, because we do get caught up in sort of like contemporary use of words and whatever might be somewhat cliche. When it's really about getting back to the basics of doing that inner inquiry, taking responsibility for ourselves, learning not to blame so much as is to not even blame ourselves, but to look at ourselves gently, compassionately, lovingly. And that way we can then look at the other compassionately and lovingly.
And neuro-linguistically, there's power in words and the way we use words. And I think without even realizing it, a lot of us were blaming others for our emotions by saying, you just triggered me. It sounds like, you've just done something wrong.
Yes. Yeah. And you find that a lot in what you work mostly with couples?
Mostly couples, sometimes entire families, and sometimes individuals who just need some deep empathy work or some coaching in how to approach a difficult conversation in a conflict.
Is there a difference between working with an individual versus a couple versus a family dynamics?
Absolutely. It's easier to go deeper to the heart and core of the matter when you're just working one-on-one with one individual. And with a couple, there's a dynamic there. So you balancing both of the people involved and paying attention to that dynamic. And as a mediator, then you want to keep it on an even keel as much as possible, pause when necessary, ask people to rephrase or restate what they're saying. And also, as an NVC specialist, what I do is I say, hold on just a minute, let me translate what you just said. Okay, let's rewind and kind of erase the way you said it, and let me translate it into NVC, into the pure observation, what you observed, what you felt, and what your needs were. And once you do that, the other person is like, oh my God, I had no idea. Why didn't you say that?
Learning how to speak differently and learning how to hear differently. But what if, do you ever get into a situation with a couple where it might actually be an abusive situation in terms of how they're speaking to each other? Can that be re-regulated into a healing of that relationship?
Yes. When it's abusive, like in terms of emotional or psychological abuse, that means that the person doing the abuse is feeling frustrated, disgusted, angry, agitated, irritated, intolerant,
Hmm.
and they're just playing out what we call in psychologists call it maladaptive behavior that they learned in childhood from a parent or a friend or a teacher or somebody that they saw that kind of language being modeled. And it's a way to express their frustration, their agitation and irritation, and their maybe even disgust. And they unconsciously, they're thinking if they can just criticize someone harshly enough and beat them up enough, the person will straighten up and fly right and behave the way they want them to. But unfortunately, that's rarely the case.
Are they open to learn? I guess if they come to you, they are open to learning how to do it differently and how to speak differently. And do you sometimes combine your meditative practice with your NVC coaching?
Yes, if my clients are open to that, if they don't think meditation is too woo-woo or too far out there for their taste, then I will work in some brief breathing or meditation, guided meditation to help them find, especially if I sense or if they appear to be really anxious about the meeting.
So you could at least use it as a way to calm them down. So maybe they will be open to hearing themselves, hearing how they're speaking, as opposed to how they might be heard differently if they learn to speak the way you're teaching us. Hopefully you're gonna be teaching us some of the steps later on in our talk, and I really look forward to that because to me it is a spiritual practice when you make the commitment to connect with your partner heart to heart, soul to soul, and you no longer want to hurt them with your words. You really want to make a commitment to doing better and being better. And A Course in Miracles always is telling us about how the person who is in front of us is the person who can be our greatest blessing. And sometimes when I think in uh, difficult situations with couples, they forget that. They forget that they chose that person. They chose that person, and they're bringing in some old childhood wounds. And I think making a commitment to hearing differently, to loving someone in an authentic way, it is spiritual practice. They may not want to call it that, but nonviolent communication to me sounds like a spiritual practice.
Yeah, there are 4 steps, and each one of them is a challenging spiritual practice in and of itself. The and with couples, whether we realize it or not, we sometimes choose someone who reminds us of a parent or a caretaker that we just couldn't connect with fully as a child. And we choose
Yeah.
someone that reminds us of them as we think if we can get intimate with this person, we can work out, we can heal that childhood wound. And
Mm.
it's extremely painful. This is why so many relationships are so difficult and painful. But um, bearing that in mind, as you said in the Course in Miracles, that person is showing up to give you that opportunity to heal that wound. And it can be hurtful to open up the wound, but that wound is not going to heal until you open it up, cleanse it out, and focus the light of consciousness deeply into the wound. You have to get to the bottom of it, to the core of it, right? To the root.
Well, when you talk about the wound, now a lot of times we're talking about trauma, and there's trauma and recovery programs where they talk about, it's not just that we can easily step away from an argument. It's that we sometimes flip our lid, right? We have this conversation. Sometimes there's something that occurs that's actually an organic shifting of our brain chemistry. And I think that's when the worst of times occur between two people. Are you coaching them around those particular harmful events?
That is what I call black belt NVC. It's the highest level because the observation is that something very harsh has been spoken that hurts me so deeply to the core that my amygdala has just shut off all my prefrontal cortex, all my learning,
Yeah.
all my education, all my brilliance, all my techniques, everything just went out the window. And now I'm stuck in this little tiny part of my brain, um, remembering only the maladaptive ways of being, of showing up. So the wisest way to respond then is to say, let's just dial this down a notch. Let's take some time to breathe. I just need to calm myself. Excuse me. We'll talk again soon, and walk away because at that point, when you're being when you're being ruled by the amygdala, nothing good is going to come out of it. You're only going to say things that will make things worse.
Right. Yeah. In the trauma and recovery movement, they say if it's hysterical, it's historical. So a lot of times, it's just a matter of realizing that exactly what you're saying, like this stuff is really old wounds, and I'm bleeding over someone who didn't cut me through my reactivity, and it can be very painful on the receiving end too. For the person who's listening to somebody else shame, blame, mock them, and trying to be present to that experience. It's hard. I think it's hard to manage, and at the same time, if you are doing your spiritual practices, like in a Course in Miracles, it always saying you're never upset for the reason you think. There's something deeper, there's something more. If we can take the time to really be introspective and go deep within ourselves to try and find out what's happening with me as a result of what's happening with you in our interaction.
The it's such a primal reaction. The amygdala is a fight or flight response, right? So if you flee, if you run away and show fear, the other person doesn't understand that can trigger their fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
If you fight, you're going to say some hurtful things because if you're in a relationship with someone, where their weak spots are and you know exactly what to say to really harm their feelings. So that's why it's so important to use the nonviolent communication and to communicate that you just need some space, you need some time. I just can't sort this out right now, but I care about you and I care about this discussion. Let's continue it later on.
Can you talk us through some of the steps that you would be advising or teaching the couples that come to try and learn to speak differently to each other?
Sure. The first step, which is probably the hardest one, and ironically, any cell phone now can do this step, but we can't. So it's amazing how technology is kind of exceeded some human capacities.
Yeah, right.
Because the
Well, because it doesn't have feelings. Technology doesn't
Right.
have emotion.
And that's the challenge, is to be able to observe objectively. I think it was Krishnamurti who said the highest form of human intelligence is observation without evaluation. So if you can just observe, oh, I see my partner, my partner's face is flushed, their eyes are bulging, they they're perspiring. I see they're really animated right now, and there's a lot of energy coming off of them. They're extremely angry, they're hurt, they're lost, and their amygdala has been activated too. So the first step is observation without evaluation. So rather than to evaluate or judge this person as, okay, they're stuck in their anger again, and I'm sick and tired of this, I'm not going to listen to this, is to just be a compassionate presence without the emotional response. I see they're really angry, they're really triggered, hurt, frustrated, and the second step is what feeling arises in me. Okay, I'm feeling frightened. I'm feeling stressed. I'm worried that they're going to really come at me in this state.
Mm,
And the third step is the need. What's my need? I'm needing some safety right now. You
yeah.
know, I'm needing my emotional airbag to deploy.
Right. Right. And yeah. And so what does the person do at that third step? How do they take care of themselves?
Just to communicate that I need some space right now. I'm feeling stressed out. I'm feeling concerned for you. I'm feeling frightened of myself. I just need some space to bring this down a few notches so that we can take this up, more calmly later. I'm willing to talk. I just need some time and some space right now. And the other person might say, "Oh, well, you always say that, or you always want to run away." And you can reassure them, "No, I'm not running away. I'm not abandoning you. I want to have this discussion, but I can't participate in a thoughtful way, in a self-introspective way, until I calm myself down."
Mm. And then there's a fourth step.
And the fourth step is the request. Because when we're agitated or frustrated, or when our basic needs are not being met and we're all stimulated, we tend to make demands. And demands are often negative. I told you not to raise your voice at me. Don't ever yell at me. I don't like it when you criticize me, right? And these sound like demands, and they're focused on what we don't want. But if we can find out what it is, that's why in the third step, if you excuse yourself to have some time and space to do some self-introspection, a bit of breathing or meditating, self-healing, and get in touch with what your need really is, you can get clear on what it is you would like, what you would want your partner to do or say for you. And so that fourth step is so important, that it be a positive action request, not a negative, not saying I don't like this, I don't do this, don't speak to me that way. But for instance, in that case, look, I had some time to do some self-introspection, and I would really like for you to explain to me why you felt so hurt and so angry a while ago. Can you help
Mm.
me to understand? Because it just came so rapidly and so suddenly, I felt overwhelmed, and I couldn't understand. Can you please unpack it for me? Right?
So in the Course in Miracles, again, they say something to the effect of anything that's not love is a call for love. And is there a way that we can learn to have so much compassion, not to take abuse if it is an abusive situation, but to have so much compassion that we can see this is a call for love. How can I be loving? Because isn't the person asking, "Don't you love me?" Like how I want you to love me is not the way you're loving me, and so I'm gonna have like a little temper tantrum, and somehow getting in touch with that inner child that's having an upset. Can we learn to see that person as a child who's having an upset, as opposed to an adult that's intimidating and maybe even scaring us?
Yes, that's challenging to look to the inner child that is before you, even though they're in an adult body. Because as children, when we had temper tantrums, sometimes it worked for us. We got what we wanted.
True, yes.
If the parent or caretaker didn't have a lot of time or energy to deal with it, they're just, okay, here. And we got what we wanted. So that's one of those maladaptive responses that we learned way, way back, and we
Yeah.
still sometimes try them today, but they they don't always work, not as adults.
Right, because as adults, we don't want to be functioning as children. And so if the other person is having that childlike, wound that's being activated, it's probably a difficult balance to find compassion and at the same time wanting to run away, and the person who's being yelled at wants to protect himself and at the same time have compassion for the other person. So where in these steps does that balance occur?
That goes back to step number one, the observation without evaluation, observation without judgment, to be able to kind of rewind, fast rewind, right? And just look and remember that this is someone that you care deeply about. You're in a relationship with this person of some kind. And to go back to step number one, observation without evaluation, without judgment. I see that a nerve has been touched. This person is in tremendous pain right now, and they will gladly share their pain with me in a painful way,
No need
right?
to share that. Thank you, but no thank you. I
And
mean,
so
there has to be a point at which some lines are drawn, right? I mean, you can't just continuously be on the receiving end of somebody's tripped up amygdala, right? I mean, I guess
right,
that's where the practice comes in. Two people have to be committed to doing this practice.
yes. Well, actually, if one person has a sort of black belt level of skill in NVC,
Ah,
that's enough.
oh yeah?
Um, yes. Takes two to tango if they're really going to do a very beautiful dance together. But if one has really high level skills, they can lift the other one gently up to
Ah.
that level. Yeah, it's not easy. Very few people can do that. I wouldn't claim to always be able to do that myself. But this is something that I call the code, the NVC code, CODE. It's an abbreviation for communication of deep empathy.
Ah.
And this does not come naturally to human beings. This is training, practice, the same way that you wouldn't be able to just go and chop a block of cement and be able to break it. But these martial artists develop the capacity to focus so intently, so much energy. And so that's what you're doing. You're going back to step one. Okay, I see this person is very angry. There's a lot of energy here generated from hurt, from childhood wounding, and they're looking for blood right now. Can I can I sidestep that attack and just be an empathic presence? This is almost superhuman, but yet we all do have the capacity to develop it, to work toward it. I'm not
Hmm.
saying there's a silver bullet or a pill. A lot of big pharmaceutical companies might tell you there's a pill for that, but I don't believe there is.
Unfortunately, there's not. Right, right.
And that communication of deep empathy is just being a compassionate presence, seeing that they're in pain, um, like you said, holding space for them, but also keeping your boundary to keep yourself safe and know that
Mm.
this is their pain. It's not my pain. No matter what they say or do to me, it's like a child screaming or throwing food. You don't have to take it personally. And just hearing what they're saying, reflecting back to them what they're saying, and in your own words, as you do that, they will say, yes, exactly. Or no, it's not like that. It's like this. And then you reflect back in your own words so that they can see that you're actually hearing and still caring about them, even though their amygdala is completely tripped. They're in a maladaptive behavior, they're in attack mode, and they will soften right down within a minute or two,
So
three at the most.
if there has been some damage done, if there's been some true deep hurt, um, in religion, in Course in Miracles and religious practices and spiritual practices and mystic studies, there's a lot of focus on forgiveness. And it's not about anything goes and anything you do is okay, and saying that all behaviors are fine, but is there a place where couples learn to forgive the past so that they can be in the, do you use that languaging or no?
What I found most helpful with forgiveness, because forgiveness is often a journey that takes tremendous amount of time. It's an organic process, right? Some people are able to just on a dime say, well, I forgive you, or you've apologized to me sincerely, and I see you felt my pain. You're forgiven, right?
Oh yeah,
But a
there's
lot
nothing
of,
like a sincere apology. True, touches
yeah,
me.
but a lot of people have been taught in growing up and watching their models, their parents, their teachers, and their heroes never apologize. That's a sign of weakness. And some people will not apologize, or if they do, they'll give a backhanded apology like, well, I'm sorry that you felt
Right.
hurt by that. They put it on you. So forgiveness can be, it can come quickly if someone gives you a really deep, heartfelt apology and you accept it. But otherwise, especially if two people have just separated and that's it, and their last memory is a painful one, it's very hard to forgive and forget. True forgiveness involves forgetness, where forgive and forget, where it's just wiped clean. And so in NVC, what I found helpful with forgiveness is to be able to examine the enemy image that you've created, because when someone has hurt you, you have this enemy image in your
Yeah.
mind. And if you look at that enemy image really closely and you and this is the part where you observe without evaluation, you open your heart and mind to imagine what they might have been going through, what their childhood wound might have been, what they were feeling, what they were observing, how they were taking what they were observing, what they were feeling, and what they were needing when they said or did those really hurtful things to you. And bearing in mind, you know what it's like to have your amygdala shut down, your prefrontal cortex. So you know that they probably also had theirs shut down. So it was an autonomic, like, a volcanic eruption that they had no control over. And when you look at it in that way, there is nothing to forgive. You get it. You can feel compassion. It's kind of like a shortcut to forgiveness, because forgiveness is required when you have the enemy image and you built that up and we hold that enemy image. We put a lot of energy into that person is so bad and they're so mean and oh, what a horrible person. We have those thoughts occasionally and that's just a defense. But if you let down that wall and look at the enemy image and deconstruct it, you don't have to go through the whole process of forgiving. You just understand and you feel compassion. And it's like that was really nothing. And that's what all the mystics and Kabbalah and a lot of the healing experts try to get across to us, that
Yes.
in the greater scheme of your whole life and of the universe and all the planets and planes, that was less than a grain of sand. It was, but we blow it up in our mind with the enemy image to make it into a huge thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. The enemy image. You're right. We're the ones who just keep making it bigger and bigger. And of course, the miracle says that too. It says there's nothing to forgive. And the creation of the image is within. We're the one who do that. It's almost like we have to forgive our own minds. If there's anything to forgive your own mind for creating that enemy image and for making this other person's upset something that you have to condemn and blame them for whatever it is you're going through, as opposed to having that deep empathy and that deep compassion. And I just want to let people know that a few weeks ago, we were talking about something, and you asked me about a specific incident in my life, and I was talking. And next thing I knew, it was almost like we just moved into this NVC process. And next thing I know, you were moving me through the step one, the observation, and all the steps. And I felt so calm and so loved. I said, Steve, I feel like you love me. I mean, it just felt so complete. And it wasn't even like an official session. It was just you sort of moving me through those steps. So I highly recommend it. And it felt meditative. It felt spiritual. It felt loving, but it was definitely empathetic and compassionate. And I can see how if I'm having an upset with someone, if I go through those steps, it really is my own self making the decision to rise higher and to feel more deeply and to connect heart to heart, soul to soul with this other person. And it's to me, I know you might not want to mention it to your clients that it's a spiritual practice, but it certainly does seem so, because we're moving out of the egoic mind. It's about not being so ego driven and being more heart driven.
Speaking from the heart, listening from the heart. And that's a skill that I don't think we were all raised with, to learn to really speak from the heart and to be able to hear from the heart. Another thing to bear in mind is when someone that we're close to knows how to hurt us, and they attack us or criticize us, whether it's a bunch of text messages or in your face.
Voicemails.
Sometimes people, it's such a knee-jerk response for people when they're hurt that they just lash out in anger. And sometimes it's literally what I call blackout rage. They,
Oh, right. Yeah, you kind of almost like, well, I can't even remember how we got here. How did that happen?
yeah. And you wonder, why hasn't this person so much as mentioned it or come around and said, I'm really sorry for what I said to you. That was really mean-spirited. I apologize. Because if it was blackout rage, they weren't there. It was almost like they had stepped out and just their wounded child showed up and took over, and then they came back, and they don't understand why you were so hurt. They have
Yeah.
no clue because it was blackout rage. They don't remember at all what they said. They just remember they had a flash of anger. And so that's another thing that helps to deconstruct the enemy images, just remembering that there is this thing called blackout rage. And how can you hold someone responsible? Well, we could say they're an adult, they're responsible for their behavior. But if they weren't even aware of it, if it all happened unconsciously, then how can we hold it against the conscious person?
And so isn't there a point at which you don't have to take that anymore? I mean, is there a point at which where if only one, you said one person can hold the high watch, but if they're continuously exposed to that blackout rage, that lack of compassion on the other end, is there a point at which you feel like you have to advise them to just go their separate ways? Does that ever happen?
That's just a conscious choice you make, and you can have a relational conversation using NVC about what you've observed, the number of times you've observed it, um, how you felt, that you felt stressed, anxious, frightened, hearing these rageful words coming at you, and that you really need peace and trust and respect in your relationships, and making a request that, if you think you can meet those needs, I'm willing to continue this friendship or
Mm,
this relationship with you. But if you really honestly don't think you can, then I would need to, separate
right.
or shift this relationship, and have communication only under certain conditions that meet my needs for safety and respect and care, connection.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we discussed in the two podcasts you listened to when I was with my friend Linda talking about the holy relationship and emotional healing is that two people have to be committed to that same goal. If there's not a commitment to the goal of healing the tear that's occurred in the relationship, then maybe the nonviolent communication has to be how we will no longer continue working on this. I mean, that's also a possibility. Yeah, this conscious uncoupling.
Exactly. And sometimes, you know, some people are stuck in relationships for financial reasons or emotional reasons, or they're getting older and they're afraid of being single again, so they will stay in an abusive relationship, sometimes with a supervisor or a boss who is abusive, and yet you need that job, right? So people will sometimes choose consciously just to tolerate it and practice their black belt NVC the best they can to recognize that is their partner's issue or that's their boss's issue and not take it so personally. That's also very hard to do if you are a very sensitive, heartfelt person.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned Krishnamurti earlier, and he said something once. It's a quote I was trying to remember as you were talking, but he said something to the effect of saying, "It's not that I don't care, it's just that I know it doesn't matter." And it's like if we can get to the point where we can sort of step aside from what's happening, from what appears to be chaos, and be sort of like on the outside looking in and see if there's hope, if there's forgiveness, if there's mutual connection and a commitment to nonviolent communication, then that becomes a spiritual practice for the couple. They begin to practice nonviolent communication. And I believe from what I've learned from you, that if you go through those 4 steps and you learn them and you continuously come back to them, and it's not about psychological jargon or just, you know, whatever's trendy, but to really step into that practice, that it's almost like the memory of love comes back to you. The memory of love can come back, what was truly a connection. And there's a section in A Course in Miracles called the Forgotten Song. And it's as if this ancient memory comes to you. It's as if, have you ever done this where you're listening to a song on the radio and you kind of like, oh, I remember that from like the 80s or and you start singing along. It's like, oh, how do I know all these words? It was like this forgotten song and it all comes back to you. And I think that can happen in relationships, like that love can come back, that desire to truly connect heart to heart can come back. And once you have that beautiful memory of the love that you shared, that you can start to heal through nonviolent communication. And I wanted to share something. I wanted to read something to you from that section called The Forgotten Song. And it's all about, how can we come back to those loving eyes, looking at each other with loving eyes and a loving heart. And so it's almost as if we know that, our time here is limited, right? We're not always in these bodies, but we will always have our soul. And if we can have a loving soul connection with someone, and it doesn't even have to be an intimate relationship. I have a soul connection with you that must have come from somewhere, and I'm sure it'll continue somewhere. So the Course advises this. This is from a chapter called Reason and Perception, but this particular section is called The Forgotten Song. Beyond the body, beyond the sun and stars, past everything you see that's yet somewhat familiar, is an arc of golden light that stretches as you look into the great shining circle. All the circles are filled with light before your eyes. The edges of the circles can disappear, and what is no longer in your eyes is still contained. And it tells us that this is God's vision of all her children. What is the miracle is to remember that who is here with me? Where does my memory lie? The light in one awakens in all. And what you see in your brother or your sister is what you can remember for everyone. And it reminds me of what you said earlier. It's like, can we hold the high watch? Can someone be that black belt, and just hold a high watch of love and see this golden arc of love that connects us heart to heart, soul to soul.
Well, I love that. And it's also about like holding the high watch, taking developing the black belt skills of observing without judging, and also there's a lot of overlooking involved in this, like overlooking the maladaptive behaviors, like, okay, just cut someone a break because they're obviously having a bad day or they didn't get enough sleep or whatever it is. So there's something triggered, they triggered themselves somehow. And I love what you just read because that reminds me of an old song. Speaking of old songs,
Yeah, the
a
forgotten
Carly,
song.
do you remember the Carly Simon song? I haven't got time for the pain. I haven't got room
Yeah.
for
Oh,
the
yeah,
pain.
sure. Yeah.
Haven't the need for the pain, not since I've known you. And there's too much white light raining down from the heavens. I think she says something like that in that song.
Mm,
And that ties in with spirituality and mysticism, especially the Advait, Advaita approach, the Advaitism from the Far East, and not which
it's
is basically
deep, right. That's
non-duality,
about deep self-inquiry.
deep self-inquiry, and also non-duality.
Yeah,
In the non-dual teachings, they say that all of this is an illusion. None of it is real, right? And
that's it.
we're these projections, we're going through all these dramas and things at the level of the egoic mind, but the egoic mind, the ego self, the separate self is a projection. It's a fiction. It doesn't even really exist at the highest levels of consciousness. So yeah, I love what you say. Thanks, what you read there. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, A Course in Miracles and all the others, the Vedic studies and all the Vedanta studies, I should say, and the mystic studies remind us that we're not here alone. We don't go anywhere alone. We bring our brothers and sisters with us. And so if we can see each other with loving eyes, then we can see ourselves with loving eyes, and we can move toward that non-violent way of being, not just how we communicate, but really how we live, to live a life of nonviolence. Nonviolent, just using the word violence sounds so strong, but it's really about compassion and empathy and deep understanding. Are there when we're done here, we're going to add in the comments references for people to look up about nonviolent communication. I know there's a book that you studied deeply and ongoing, as well as how people can find you, because people might want to join in on your meditative classes, as well as to get coached in nonviolent communication. So you might want to throw out some things, but then we'll also make sure that we make notations so people can follow up.
Absolutely. And I would you like me to give my website?
Yeah, sure.
My website is www.mediation hyphen dot I'm sorry, mediation-usa.net. So it's like the word meditation, but without the T in the middle. It's mediation because NVC, I use NVC as a tool for mediation, especially with couples in conflict. So it's www.mediation-usa.net. And there's a page, as you scroll down, you'll find a page about my Sunday Zoom meditations, which are free and open to anyone who's interested. They happen at 2 o'clock every Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock Eastern time. And I would be thrilled if you found me there.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled that I found you here. I really appreciate that you are here with us today. I appreciate you so much because it's not just talk. I know it's how you live your life, and you've been a good friend to me, and I really enjoy this time together. I think that there's a lot more to say. There's not that much that can be covered in a short conversation. So I hope you'll come back sometime and we can talk some more. But thank you so much for being here, Steve Pollack, nonviolent communication coach and meditation facilitator. You're a good man. I love you, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Laurie.
All right. God bless you.